Today's session will be facilitated by Sister Shruthi Vijayakumar. Sister Shruthi is a young adult from the beautiful New Zealand, aka New Thailand as Swami calls it. She has just finished her term as a young adult coordinator and is currently serving as the lead for Serve the Planet project. She is passionate about her role that businesses can play in tackling social and environmental challenges and unlocking the potential of young people. Professionally, Shruti has worked as a management consultant for Boston Consulting Group, advising corporates and government clients. She has just led a range of social enterprises and NGOs, including the Plastic Bottle Kayak, an internationally recognized environmental project that uses storytelling, education, and adventure to raise awareness of plastic bottle pollution and P3 Foundation. Which is New Zealand's largest young adult organization, empowering over 1,000 young adult New Zealanders in the mission to end extreme poverty. Most recently, Sister Shruthi has been running her own business, coaching young adults and running an incubator to help them start and grow ventures tackling social and environmental issues. Shruti has just been recognized as a global shaper by the World Economic Forum, a global change maker by the British Council for Leadership, and contributes to the community and is currently pursuing her MBA at the University of Oxford. Without further ado, Shruti, the ball is all yours.
Om Sairam, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you all here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may be. I just wanted to start by sharing a quick story with you around the context of this workshop. So, Sister Chandani from the Young Adult Talent Development Team approached me a couple of months ago and asked if I could run this workshop on time management. And I spent a couple of moments, a couple of days thinking about it, and I thought I had some time, and it was an interesting topic, so I jumped on board. Little did I realize Swami's divine hand behind everything till down the track. So if we fast forward, a month later, I had just moved from New Zealand to Oxford, where I'm studying now, and I'd been spending, a couple of weeks preparing this session, and it was just the most perfect timing, coming to a new place, starting a new set of studies. There was so much going on, so many distractions, so many opportunities, and there could not have been a better time in my life for Swami to remind me what I knew about time management, for him to teach me new things, and for us to share the space where we can learn together. So I really feel his divine presence in both the topic, the timing, and feel like I've learned a lot during the preparation. So I'm very excited to be here and to share this morning, afternoon, and evening with you, wherever you may be. So jumping right ahead, I've just shared my screen, so hopefully you all will be able to see that without any issues. I wanted to start with another story. So on the screen you can see a plastic container. You can see some large rocks, some smaller rocks, and some sand. So there once was this expert in time management, and he was talking to his class of students, and he took this plastic container in front of him, and he took this container and he filled it with all these big rocks, the big rocks you can see in the corner of that image. And once this container was filled to the top, he asked the students, dear students, is this container full? And all the students said, yes sir, the container's full of rocks, yeah, it looks pretty full to me. And then he said, are you so sure about that? And he took the smaller rocks, the ones you'll see just to the left of the big rocks, and he started pouring these into the container. And slowly but surely the smaller rocks fell in through the gaps and through the cracks around the big rocks, and they sat in the container as well. And now this professor asked the class, tell me, is the container full now? And the students replied, I'm not so sure, Last time I thought it was full, it wasn't. Maybe there's still some space. And he said, you're very right. He took the sand now, and he poured the sand into the container. And the sand fell in through all the remaining gaps and cracks. And he asked the class once more, now is the container full? And they said, yes sir, it looks quite full. Then this professor asked the class, what's the purpose of this story? And the class responded, one student put their hand up and said, no matter how full your schedule is, you can always cram in more things. And the professor said, no, that's not quite the purpose, but you're close. For us to fill this container with all the rocks, we have to start with the big rocks first. And if you look at the image on the right, only if we put in the big rocks, then the smaller rocks, and then the sand, will the container fill to the top. And if you look at the image to the left, if we start with the sand, then put the medium rocks, and end with the big rocks, everything doesn't fit. And the essence of the story really emphasizes that we've got to start with the big rocks. And in the context of time management, the big rocks are our biggest priorities, the most important things to us. And if we know our priorities and know what these big rocks are, everything else can fit in and we can make time for everything that's important to us. So I invite you to hold on to this concept as we move through the workshop. We'll be touching back on it in a moment and exploring the role of priorities, which I think for me is really the essence of good time management. So for today, we've got a number of objectives. By the end of the session, the hope is that you'll learn a little bit more about time management, and we'll look at a number of specific aspects relating to it. As mentioned before, one is prioritization, one will be energy management, saying no, delegation, scheduling. There'll be a couple of others as well. So these are some of the things we'll be covering over the next hour or so. I wanted to define time management before we went any further, just to get us all on the same page. So I looked this up in the Oxford Dictionary not too long ago, and the definition that came up that sums it up quite nicely, I think, is as follows. Time management is the ability to use one's time effectively or productively, especially at work. So for the purposes of this workshop, in essence, I think time management is really looking at how can we complete our tasks, complete the things that are important to us, given we have a limited amount of time, whether that's at work or study, at home, wherever we may be. Before going any further, I wanted to share some words from Swami. So back in 2009, we had a Zone 3 retreat. So this is for New Zealand, Australia, Fiji. And this letter from Swami was manifested in the hands of one of the young adult leaders at the time. So it was literally, a letter from Swami just for us Zone 3 youth. And I think it applies beautifully to us young adults all around the world. And he, in this letter, at the start, shares a really beautiful message around time management. So Swami says in this, remember something. Enjoy every single second, yet know your priorities. You can do everything in life with good time management and love. You can achieve great feats. Make the most of your time. And I think this is just beautiful, where Swami is just reminding us that time management, knowing our priorities, is really the essence of making the most of our life. And if we can combine this with love, really there's no limits to what we can achieve. I wanted to share one more quote from Swami as well. And this one comes from a Divine Discourse back in 1997. And in this discourse, Swami said, a nation's prosperity is dependent on how people use their time in the performance of good actions. The challenge for humanity is lack of clarity, motivation, and laziness. You may be intelligent, but if you do not act, nothing is going to happen. This denies us the ability to offer our gifts to the world. Time wasted is life wasted. And I think, again, Swami so beautifully has captured the essence of time management, but also some of these big barriers. And if we look at the things he's raised around lack of clarity, again, I think that comes back to knowing our priorities, knowing what these big rocks are in our life, and then having the motivation and the determination to work through them, to overcome laziness and really use our time effectively to serve and be of service to the world. So we're going to start with a quick poll before we move any further. So in a moment, a poll is going to come up to the right of your screen, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on what your biggest time management challenge is. And there's 5 options there. If none of these options apply, you can type in your response. So we'll give it just one moment and you can read it. So if we look at our responses, it sounds like the most common response, or the common 2 responses here, are both procrastinating and prioritization. As a current student, I can definitely say I relate to both of these. Interesting to see, most of us are probably good delegators. I acknowledge that many of us will probably struggle across a number of these things. I know I definitely can improve across the board, but also interesting to note that those are the 2 kind of most common themes amongst our group. So we'll be covering both of those shortly. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to go through 5 steps that I think will really help us work through effective time management. So as we go through each of these steps, I'm going to give an example. I'm actually joined today by a wonderful youth from New Zealand, Nithya. So Nithya and I are going to have a bit of a conversation, and we're going to share a couple of examples for each of these steps. But at the same time, we also invite you to go through the process as well, to reflect on the questions that we pose, and also to type your responses in the chat box. And we'd love to see what your responses and what your thoughts are, and to share that with everyone as well, so we can really learn from each other. So the first of these 5 steps is really to think about what is important to us, what really matters, and this really will inform our prioritization, which we'll come to in a moment. So I invite you all to imagine it's been a year. So it's the end of October, the start of November of 2018. It's been a whole year. And think for a moment, in this year, what do you want to have achieved, either professionally, personally, or spiritually? So this could be in relation to your career, to your health, to a hobby you're pursuing, through a spiritual goal, a bad quality you're overcoming. It could be anything. There's no limits really. And we invite you to think and to share with us in the chat box what are some of the things you would have liked to have achieved in a year's time. We'll give you about a minute to share your thoughts with us, and at the same time, Nithya and I will share some examples. So Nithya, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to the group and share with us maybe one of your big goals or big rocks for the next year?
So I'm a Thai young adult who's just also become a mother a few months ago, and so trying to integrate that into my life is a big thing. So being a new mother, I'd like to focus on growing spiritually through the experiences of motherhood, so trying to implement as much spiritual practices into Hridaya, who's my daughter.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
How about you, Shruthi?
So for me, a goal that I've got in the next year, so I've just started some study, as I shared, and the area of study I'm doing is business, and I'm really interested in how business can be more values-driven and more sustainable and things like that. So in the next year, I'm hoping to both learn more about this field and better understand how I can best contribute to this issue. So I invite you as well to share some of your thoughts. Do type them in the chat box. We're going to have to move through in the interest of time, but we'd love to hear some of the goals and big rocks that some of you share as well. So moving on from this, it's important to firstly have a sense of, what are the big priorities or the big goals or the things that are important to us, be it growing spiritually through motherhood, as Nithya said, or more study focused, or a number of these things. But the key thing is to make time and progress toward these every single day. And I think this quote captures the sentiment quite beautifully. As we spend our days, so we spend our lives. And I think it's important that each day of ours is a microcosm and includes all the things that are important to us. And we continue to make progress on these big goals. So the next step number 2, is thinking about what are the actionable steps we might take to work toward this big goal. So once again, I invite you to think about, what was the initial goal that you set for yourself? And take a moment, maybe 30 seconds or a minute, to reflect on what are the actionable steps you can take as you work toward this goal. And once again, as you think about this, do share your thoughts in the chat box, and Nithya and I will have a conversation around it as well to provide an example. So Nithya, you shared your goal for the year is to grow spiritually through this experience of motherhood, which is very beautiful. What are some of the actionable steps that you want to take to work toward this?
For me, I think a daily reflection on my experiences and what I've learned for the day, bringing Hridaya up for her. It's always a new moment. She's always doing something new. So taking time to reflect on what I can learn from her. She's always got so much to teach. Her fearlessness, her trust, her faith. The other thing, what I'd like to put into practice is, while she's growing, I'm teaching her new things. A simple example can be teaching her body parts like head and shoulders, but putting the spiritual element into it. So saying, these are your loving hands, these are your gentle eyes, your serving hands. So just putting a bit of spirituality into her life.
Yeah, beautiful.
And Shruthi, how would you like to achieve your goals?
So my goal was, I'm better understanding how business can be more values driven and what my role is in this. So I think some of the things I could do to work toward this is identifying, who are the professors at this university, who are the individuals or the companies that are working toward this, and making time to meet with them and learn from them. Another one would be finding relevant extracurricular activities, and also in the way you've shared, taking time to reflect and learn and be conscious of how my thinking is changing. Thank you, Ritesh, as well for sharing your steps. So Ritesh, spiritually, in terms of the spiritual goals, he wants to read Swami literature every day. Beautiful. So if you've got any other actions in the way Ritesh has beautifully shared, do type those in as well. And we'll move on to the next step. We'll share Janani's quickly as well. She wants to develop better study habits, but not let it compromise how much I spend time on side activities. Beautiful. And if you have any actionable steps under that goal, Janani, do share as well. It's lovely to hear what you all are working toward. So the next step, which I think is probably one of the most important, is thinking about how do we prioritize and manage all of our tasks. So we'll have a number of steps in relation to the goals we're working toward. So in Nitya's instance, reflecting on what she's learning from her daughter Hidea. In my instance, meeting professors or people in the area of work I want to move into. But aside from that, we all have lots of other things going on. We all wear multiple hats, from being friends, mothers, sisters, daughters, brothers, whatever roles we're playing, students, and with that come a number of tasks. So this is a matrix that can help us prioritize all the different tasks we've got going on. And this was created by a guy called Stephen Covey. He's got a brilliant book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that I highly recommend. And in this book, he shares this matrix. So how it basically works is there are 4 boxes, and going down the left column, you want to think about the tasks or the activities you have to do that are really urgent. On the right side, the things that are not so urgent. And along the top, you want to be thinking about all the tasks that are really important to you, so the things that align with your big goals, your rocks, your priorities. And down the bottom, the things that are less important. So once again, we invite you to take some time to reflect on what are the different tasks you might have in these different boxes, and to note that down for yourself. And whilst you do that, Nitya and I will once again share a couple of examples. So Nitya, what are some of the things that you might have in these different quadrants?
So for me, simple things like house chores, making dinner, getting the laundry done would go into quadrant one, and something focusing on Hridaya's development, like her play groups or engaging her in different activities, and also side activities would probably go into quadrant 2. But I suppose with side activities, they can be spread out to different quadrants. But that would be an example. Shruthi, if you'd like to go further in depth.
Yeah, beautiful, Nitya. So I just plotted a few examples of some of the things that are going on at the moment. So quadrant 1, these are the things that are really urgent and really important. So I've got an accounting assignment due on Monday, so that's feeling really urgent and really important. I just moved into a new place in my college, so I need to set up my kitchen. So again, really critical, needs to happen soon, really important so I can cook. So that's an example of the things in quadrant 1. And these are the things that you typically want to do first or do very early on because of that urgency and given they're important as well. Quadrant 2, this is, I think, probably the most important quadrant, the things that are really important but not so urgent. So for me, this is things like sadhana, taking time to meditate, taking time to go to bhajans and service activities, exercising, reading, learning, reflection. And I think here is where a lot of the tasks in relation to my bigger goal sets, connecting with professors and companies in relation to the career and the area of work I want to move into. So quadrant 2, these are the things we either want to do next or do first as well. Both of these 2 quadrants, quadrant 1 and 2, is where we want to be spending most of our time, given this is the stuff that's really important to us. Quadrant 3, down the bottom left, these are the things that are really urgent but not so important. So an example is my college has rowing trials, and I was thinking maybe I could row. It's not the main thing I came here for, but it could be nice, so it feels urgent, and those rowing trials are this weekend, but it's really not that important. So these are the things that I really want to delegate or maybe say no to, or if I really want to do them last once all the important things I've worked through. What I don't want to end up doing is going to these rowing trials and joining the debating group and doing all these tasks and then not having time for the sadhana or the exercise or connecting with the professors and doing the other things that are more important. And the fourth quadrant down the bottom right is this dangerous one which can suck a lot of our time. It's the things we want to avoid or minimize altogether. So this could be social media, it could be TV, it could be some socializing. There's other things as well, but it's really the things that aren't urgent, they don't have a time limit, and they're really not important to us either. So this is the essence of this matrix. Before we move forward, I just wanted to share a few other thoughts that you guys had typed into the chat box. So Irina has shared that one of her goals is balancing business, her job, her family life, diet, activities, sport, and spiritual growth. Amazing, great goal. Fragine has shared, I would love to connect all three together, getting all the wives and family members to be involved in an entrepreneurship activity. Beautiful. And Janani has shared one of the actions to move toward her goal around building better habits and study habits and not compromising her spirituality is evaluating which side activities advance her so she doesn't say yes to everything, and also being conscious about how much time she needs to study. From Ritesh, we've got also personal growth, sports, fitness, and avoiding Facebook and social media, which beautifully comes into that fourth quadrant. So thank you all for sharing that. We're going to now move into another poll. This time the question we're posing to you all is, how often do you feel like you're busy? So the poll will come up once again to the right of your screen, just like before. I'll just load it up. And again, you can interpret this how you like. And I know our busyness changes over time. Right now, I definitely feel like a D. But just have a think about it. Generally, how do you feel in terms of how busy you are when it comes to your day or your week? So we're finding that it's pretty split. So none of us are hardly ever busy. So we're all a bit busy. A group of us, about a third of us are busy now and then. About a third of us are busy more than half our time. And about a third of us are busy nearly all the time. So I think what's clear is that most of us are quite busy. How? That varies a little bit. But I think especially in this day and age with the fast-paced world that many of us live in, with our competing interests from work, from family, from study, all the distractions of technology, it's very easy to feel quite busy. And I think in that busyness, it's easy to forget how much time we really have. So we're going to do a bit of maths together, just to remind ourselves, and I think be empowered by how much time is actually in our disposal. So if we think about a week, which is comprised of 7 days, each with 24 hours. We've each got 168 hours in a week. Say we're doing full-time work or study, which is on average, that might take up 40 hours a week. And suppose we're sleeping 8 hours a night. So a good amount of sleep a night. So that's 56 hours of sleep a night, 8 hours by 7 nights. So if we subtract 168 hours and subtract 40 hours for work or study and 56 hours for sleep, we're left with 72 hours for everything else. And I know there's a lot of other things that's not included in that initial calculation, from your work at home to other commitments you might have. But 72 hours is a lot of time. That's like 2.5 whole days. And I think in the madness and the busyness of everything, often I forget that actually there's a lot of time at my disposal. And even say we were working a 50-hour job, or it's that week where all the assignments are due and I'm actually at university all day, there's still 60 hours remaining. Even with a 60-hour job, there's 50 hours remaining. And even if it's one of those hectic work weeks and you're in the office all day, every day, there's still at least a good 40 hours a week remaining. And just think 40 hours still is more than a day's worth of time. So I think the real message here is that we all have time, regardless of how busy we are. There is time, and the question is really, how can we utilize that effectively, which we'll jump into in a moment. We wanted to share an example of a young adult that many of you will know, who we think utilizes this full 168 hours really effectively. Nithya.
So I think our beautiful example is our previous international youth coordinator, Brother Shiven. He's shared on several occasions how he uses his time, and his sleep-in time is about 5 a.m., maybe 6 a.m., but it's usually between 4 and 5 a.m. He's tried to balance finishing a PhD while coordinating the International Youth Festival, and he's got a son. I know he practices and coaches his son's soccer, yet you still see him at weekly site activities and very hands-on. He makes full use of his 168 hours. I think that's a beautiful example on how we can make use of our time.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's on top of a full-time job, right?
Yeah.
A full-time job,
amazing.
PhD, has a son, actively involved with his activities, turns up at Buttons every week, coordinated an entire festival. And I think that is a real inspiration to us that there's really a lot of time at our disposal if we can use it well. So we've gone through this quadrant and talked about these 4 boxes. So the next step is thinking about how do we manage these tasks and actually effectively achieve the things that are important to us and not do the things and not get distracted by the things that are less important. And the first point we wanted to share was around scheduling. And I think this quote sums it up beautifully. Things that get scheduled are things that get done. And scheduling, I think, is especially important for these first 2 quadrants, the things that are really important to us. And in particular, the second quadrant, the things that don't have an urgent timeline. And what can happen is it's easy, and I've experienced this, when we get so caught up in doing the things that are really urgent. I can be busy doing my assignment, I can be busy responding to messages on my phone, going to a whole bunch of activities, going to social events, and getting so caught up in things that are happening now that feel really urgent that at the end of the day I'm not exercising as much as I want, I'm not reading as much as I want, I'm not actually giving the full time I might want to do my morning meditation. On the flip side, I have experienced when I schedule these things in the second quadrant and make them a priority both in my mind but also in my calendar, they really get done. And so for me, this looks like having a 2-hour block, in an afternoon where I'm saying this is time for me and time for reflection, or this is a 3-hour chunk where I'm going to go and sit and meet a whole bunch of interesting professors. And regardless of what comes up, I've blocked this time out. It may not be urgent. I can do it tomorrow. I can do it the next week. But I'm going to block it in my calendar and really commit to making this time. So I think it's a simple thing to schedule, but just the act of scheduling and saying all of these things are important, particularly the things in quadrant 2, can mean we actually move forward and are more likely to do them. And we wanted to share a few tips and thoughts around scheduling. So one, scheduling works really effectively if your tasks are actionable. So if you've got something in your schedule like figure out my life and what I want to do with my career, that's really intimidating and I'm going to struggle to action on that. But if I've got a really actionable task like identify 5 companies working in the field I want to move into, that now feels really practical and really actionable. Second thing is setting really clear time limits. So, deciding I'm going to spend an hour or 2 hours for this task, 3 hours for this task, and taking that time to plan our day or plan our week, which gets to that 4th point. The third one here is about getting an earlier start. And I know Swami recommends 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. for students. It can be a stretch. I acknowledge that's not always easy, particularly in the winter. But even if you can get up, half an hour earlier in the morning, or really utilize that morning time, I'm sure many of you already are, that can be a really beautiful window to get ahead on some of your tasks and work before all the distractions in the world wakes up. The final point here, which I think is a really simple but also effective one, is doing the hardest thing first. So it's really easy to wake up and to check our phones, reply to a whole bunch of messages, check our emails, and before you know it, the morning is trickling away. But if you can prioritize and go, what's the hardest but really important thing on my list, and finish this off, and by 10 a.m. if you've done the hardest task, suddenly you've built really good momentum and you're in a good place to get through everything else. So as much as it's nice to procrastinate this task, I really encourage you to think about what's the really hard thing and let me get it done early on. Another tool which can be really helpful when it comes to scheduling is thinking about your energy levels and how these vary during the day. So if you look at this graph, we've got on the y-axis energy levels, on the x-axis time. And I invite you to draw up a similar graph on a piece of paper if you've got one handy. Draw up a little axis like this, and you can do the activity with me as I go through it as well. So what this involves is thinking about how do your energy levels vary during the day. And each one of us is different. Some of us are night owls, some of us are early morning, some of us peak in the midday sun. But we want to think about how our personal energy levels vary during the day. So if I think about me, for example, when I wake up, my energy is quite low. I'm still waking up. Then it grows quite a bit, and by like mid-morning, I'm like quite energized. Oh, sorry, this is one moment. Let's bring this back up. So as mentioned, quite low, increases quite nicely by mid-morning. I'm at a really good place. As we approach lunch, my energy drops a little bit, and then it kind of picks up as I'm eating and nourished, and then I'm okay in the afternoon for a bit. But then by mid-afternoon, I go way down, and I'm actually like quite unproductive, kind of 2 to 4 p.m. usually. I kind of improve as we approach dinner. After dinner, I kind of have another burst of energy, not quite as high as the morning, and then slowly as the night fades, I trickle. Sometimes I have another one later in the night, but then my energy is quite dead by like 11 p.m. So that's an example of how my energy might be mapped during the day. And how we can use this is we can think about how do our energy levels align with our scheduling. And for me, what's really important is looking at what are the really hard or challenging tasks on my matrix, and let me schedule the tasks that require a lot of energy, the really intellectually challenging tasks, the hard conversations I might need to have, anything that requires a lot of my energy. Let me put that, in these hours where I've got a lot of energy. For me, that would be early morning, mid-morning, where I'm at my peak, or otherwise evening is good as well. On the flip side, if there are things on my list that don't require a lot of energy or are a bit easier to do, so for example, this might be catching up with a friend or going for a run, this is the stuff I typically schedule in the afternoon as much as possible. And what I've noticed is if in that afternoon period I schedule getting my assignment done, I'll struggle and I'll be quite unproductive, and I'm just much slower and less effective with my time. But if I can save that assignment, for the morning or even for the evening, and use that afternoon time to replying to emails or some of the tasks that require less energy, overall I'm able to better utilize my time during the day. So this is quite a simple activity. You can map it out yourself, and then as you schedule, think about how you can align your scheduling with your energy levels. So we'll move ahead to the next part of this. So the third quadrant on our chart, quadrant number 3, these are the tasks that are urgent but not so important. So it could be, this rowing trial I have this weekend. It could be replying to a WhatsApp message which feels really urgent but isn't really that important, answering a call, or some meetings or some activities we might have. And one way you can tackle this box is by saying no. And this is, Janani had shared it earlier as one of her kind of tasks, saying no to more activities. And I think this is one of the hardest things to do. And I realized earlier this year, I used to be like a real yes person. I used to say yes to everything. And I had this moment of realization, which is quite obvious really, where it was clear that there are an infinite number of great people to meet, an infinite number of projects to get involved with that are meaningful, an infinite number of experiences to have. But the reality is I'm one person and I only have 24 hours, and there's real value to be gained if I can focus. And really, I don't need to be the person saying yes to all of these things. And there's a real joy if I can be conscious about what are the things that are important and focus on these things and say no to others and give those opportunities to other people as well. So saying no, I think, is really, really critical. It's tough. There's always this, we call it FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And I think this kind of feeling, which is exacerbated by social media, makes us want to say yes to a lot of things and not miss out on anything. But really saying no can be quite empowering. And here are a few kind of tips or thoughts we wanted to share in relation to this. So when presented with an opportunity, it's quite effective to first take some time out to consider the request. There can be a temptation to want to give an answer right then and say yes or say no, but just giving yourself time to think about it can be a good first step. Then there's a question of, is this important to me, and does it align with our big rocks? And if you're anything like me, you might think everything is important. It's all beneficial, but really, how important is this? And is it really aligned to those most important goals I've set for myself? And if it is, great. If it's not, maybe it's something I could say no to. Even if it is something that's really important, do I have the time and energy to commit to it? And for me, this looks like looking at my calendar and seeing, if I do join this rowing team, that's going to be 4 hours 2 mornings a week from 6 to 10 when the rowing team trains, that means I have to go to bed earlier, and there's a number of implications around this. So do I actually have the time and energy, even if it's really important, to actually commit? If so, great. If not, am I willing to drop something else, or should I even be doing this in the first place? And this really links to the next point around opportunity cost, which basically means by saying yes to this opportunity, what am I by default saying no to? So if I'm saying yes, to this morning session, it means I'm not going to have that time in the morning to talk to these professors or to exercise or do other things that I'd normally do in that time. And is that okay? And the final one is, maybe I don't have to help with the full thing. Maybe I can help with part of the request, or is there someone else who's better placed for it? And this can be beautiful, and often by us saying no, the opportunity is shared with someone else, and that can be beautiful for everyone. So I'll share an example in just a moment, but before doing so, I wanted to go with the other aspect or way we can manage Quadrant 3, and this is delegation. And I know this came up as well on the quiz we did earlier on, where a few of us noted that delegation is something we struggle with. And again, it's one of the easiest ways, I think, to remove the things in Quadrant 3 off our plate so we can really focus on the things that are most important. So a few tips around delegation. One, I think about who it is that might be able to help and approach them, but also when you approach them, tell them why you're approaching them and what it is about them that you think makes them really suited for the task. I think it's helpful when you can to be specific about the task and the timelines and what it involves. Thirdly, even if you're delegating, to still be in a position where you can provide ongoing support depending on what the individual needs. And finally, to share feedback with them as well and really support them on that journey. So I had a period earlier this year when I was applying for university, applying for the program I'm doing now. And as part of the application, there's an entrance exam called the GMAT. Some of you might have taken it. It's like this hectic 4-hour exam where you do like 5-hour exam. You're doing 2-3 hours of reading, 2-3 hours of maths, writing essays. I hadn't done maths and grammar in years, and I set my baseline test, and then my score was not looking so good, and my exam was in a month's time. So I knew I really, really had to focus on this. So I created this matrix, and the one task in the top quadrant of very urgent, very important was study, and that was it. On the second quadrant, I had exercise, do some sadhana, but literally everything else was taken off, and I wanted to be spending almost no time on quadrants 3 and quadrants 4. So during this month, I basically said no to almost anything that came up, and I ended up studying for about 12 hours a day, from about 5 or 6 in the morning till about 9 at night, because I knew that's the study I needed to do if I wanted to get through into this program. And so friends were calling me to come to their farewells. There was service projects going on. There was friends meeting up. There was other activities, sporting things, a lot going on. But for that month, I literally just had to say no to everything as much as I could and focus on study. The other thing that was key was acknowledging there are still some tasks I had on my plate, and I had to delegate them to make time for study. So at the time in New Zealand, our youths had just set up an interfaith youth council. So we had met with young adults from the Christian faith, the Buddhist faith, the Islam faith, the Sikh faith, and our SSIO youth had come together, and we had been meeting and running a number of service projects together. We had just finished a cleanup. We were going to do tree planting. We had all these ideas. And so far I had been leading this project, but I knew I really couldn't give time to this for the next month. And even beyond, as I was going to leave, I had to delegate this on. So I found an individual within our SSIO group, one of the young adults, who seemed like a good fit. I spent some time discussing with her what the project involved, introduced her to all the key people, and was available on call as she needed support, as she needed to discuss things or clarify things. And she took the project forward amazingly. She's run a number of projects since. There was a big tree planting activity recently. She's probably done it better than I would have in the first place. But the key thing here, I think, for me was acknowledging for this month I just needed to study. That was my sole focus. And I had to delegate and effectively delegate the other things on my plate so that they would still get done, but also didn't have to necessarily get done by me. The other point just to touch on before we move ahead is even though there's a lot we can delegate and say no, let's not forget at the same time that we still have that crazy 168 hours a week, possibly 70 hours of free time. So I encourage you to say no, but at the same time be conscious of not saying no too much and still being aware that we've got time on our hands. I've just noticed we've had a nice sharing of a link by one of our young adults. He shared a framework called the weighted shop job first. So thank you, Brother Vijay, for sharing that with everyone. We'll just share that with the whole group, so everyone can see the link you've shared. And if anyone else has, things you found useful, tips you found useful, frameworks you found useful, please feel free to share that in the chat box. This is really a space for us to learn from each other, and we'd love to see what other things you found useful as well. So feel free to share that, and thank you, brother, for sharing that with us. The fourth and final quadrant is this not urgent, not important box that can often suck our time. And these are the things, as mentioned earlier, we want to basically not do, not engage with, or really minimize if we are engaging with it. One way, so Steve Jobs, for him, focus was really key. And I think this quote, or this message of his, is quite beautiful, where he said, what made Apple was not so much what they chose to build, but all the projects they chose to ignore. And I think focus and intentionally deciding to not do things can be quite effective. So a few thoughts here. One, we often make to-do lists. We often make lists of all the tasks we want to do, but equally it can be quite powerful to make a stop doing list and to intentionally decide I'm not going to do a certain task. So for example, I discovered that when I use social media the most and when I procrastinate the most tends to be when I'm faced with a tough challenge that I'm working through and I don't know how to do it, so then I'll end up going to social media. So maybe there's an assignment, there's a question I'm stuck on, I'll spend 20 minutes, I'll get stuck, and then I'll start procrastinating. So on my stop doing list, I wrote, I'm not going to check social media when I'm stuck on a problem. Instead, I'm going to take a break, go outside, or talk to a friend about it. And just by intentionally writing that and being conscious that I'm not going to do this, it's acted as a really powerful trigger to move away from it. So that's one thing you could do. The other one that I found really effective is setting times for social media. So when I was in this month of studying 12 hours a day, I assigned myself 3 times a day that I would check my phone. Once was after breakfast, once was after lunch, once was after dinner. And I gave myself 10-15 minutes at each window to check it. And I found that in between, if a phone rang, I didn't really have to answer it. It could wait. Messages could wait for a few hours. Nothing was that urgent that it needed me to respond right now. But by setting this clear 10-15 minute window, I could use that to use and to reply to everything, to manage it. But I wasn't distracted during the day because I had to set time that I'd engage with. Another one that many of you will be aware of is just simply disabling notifications and removing that distraction. And one that many of you may already do is just getting rid of your TV. And that can be a really simple way to not even have the temptation to watch or can reduce the temptation to watch and free a lot of time. So those are a few thoughts on moving away from those tasks that we don't want to do. And again, if you've got any questions, if you've got any ideas of your own or things you found helpful, please do share them with our group as well. So step 4. So if we just recap for a moment, we started with step 1, defining what's important to us, what are our goals, our big rocks. Step 2 was thinking about how can we turn this into actionable steps. Step 3 was going, how do we now manage all the tasks and prioritize and actually move forward on the things that we want to move forward on. Step 4 is now creating accountability. So what can be really effective in ensuring that we actually action and act upon the tasks that we've prioritized is building some systems of accountability. This might look like a buddy system. It might look like getting the support of friends or family, sharing your goals with them. Maybe it's quite personal and you don't need to necessarily engage others. But this can really help us. So an example, many of you may have been on pilgrimages to Prashanti, and whenever we do these, we'll have like a big sadhana plan. So we had one a few years ago in New Zealand where every morning we'd have to wake up and meditate for a set number of time and chant the Gayatri, I think 108 times. And we had a bit of a buddy system where we had to do our meditation, do our chanting, and then text our team leader and say we've finished it. And if we didn't text our team leader by 7 a.m., they would call us up and say, hey, what's up? Did you sleep? What's going on? And they would hold us accountable. And what that meant was, every single day I was doing it. Yes, I wanted to do it, but having this buddy system and knowing I was doing it with other youth helped me and ensured that even when I was tired, even when it was cold and the temptation was there to just keep sleeping, I got myself out of bed. So in the same way, you might think, I think it's worth thinking about what are the ways that you could keep yourself accountable get the support of others and really support others as well with their goals, particularly when it comes to the things that are not urgent. So when it comes to Quadrant 2, the things that are really important, such as sadhana or exercise, or the things that are in Quadrant 4, such as not doing social media or not checking something. I know friends that have exchanged Facebook passwords with each other to, prevent them from jumping online. There's lots of things you can do that I think it's definitely worth thinking about. Do I need anything to keep me accountable, and what would be effective for me? The fifth and final step, and I think the most important of them all, is making time to review and reflect and to see how you're going. So one thing I do is every evening I sit and reflect on my day quite holistically on, what did I experience, what was good, what was not so good, how could I improve for tomorrow. But also really specifically, I think it's helpful to reflect on how did I spend my time today. Did I achieve what I intended to achieve? If not, why not? What have I learned and what will I change for tomorrow? And this space is really helpful, I think, at a daily level to think about how did today go and what are my goals for tomorrow, but at a weekly level as well to sit and to plan your week. And if you can just create, for me it's half an hour on a Sunday to think about what are all the things going on this week, what are my priorities, and how might these change. I think that's really quite powerful. And through this process, your priorities might change as well. So an example of this, when I came to my study, came and started my studies about a month or two ago, a high priority at the time was to really understand the academic content we were doing. And so one of the tasks that was urgent and important was doing all the pre-readings and preparing really well for all my classes. So I was doing this for a period of time, and I found it was taking, almost 2 to 3 hours a night. It was taking a lot of time, and actually, to some extent, I was over-preparing. I didn't really need to do all the optional readings, and I felt a bit over-prepared, and I found because I was spending all this time preparing for the next day, I didn't really have time to sit and meet professors or meet companies or do the other things that I wanted to do here. So during the space of reflection, I reprioritized and the matrix changed. I decided, actually, the only things that are really urgent and important is the essential readings. All the optional readings that are really urgent but not so important. And that extra time I want to spend on connecting with companies or other students or other activities going on here. And had it not been for the space of reflection, I think it's easy to keep doing what we're doing and getting to the end of the year and going, actually, I had this great year, I learned a lot, but did I actually move on the goals that mattered most to me? So I really invite you, I'm sure many of you probably already take time to reflect, but in your reflection, if you aren't already, bring in space to think about how you are using your time, what you are learning about yourself. Maybe with respect to energy management, you'll try one thing and then try another. So create space to experiment, but also to reflect and learn. Finally, if we think about bringing all these steps together, I think it's quite a beautiful cycle. So we define what's important, we break that down into actionable steps, we prioritize these steps amongst all the other tasks we've got going on, we schedule them, manage these tasks that might involve saying no, delegating tasks. 4, we build systems of accountability. And 5, we review and reflect, and then our priorities might change or our systems might change as well. And I think this is a cycle that's pretty continuous and changing, and really summarizes the essence of the framework we've shared. Before we wrap up, I wanted to share a quote with you. I think in all the things going on, if we think back to the story at the start and the big rocks, as Sai youth, as Sai young adults, I think the most important rocks, or the biggest things in our life, often come back to our connection with Swami, our spirituality. A number of you shared spiritual goals. And I think the Zen proverb sums up the importance of these quite beautifully. You should sit in meditation for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, then you should sit for an hour. And I think that's just a beautiful reminder that at the end of the day, if we can prioritize Swami and prioritize our sadhana, whether that's music or service or contemplation or whatever that might look like, even if it's your work, if we can make this the center point of our life, I really think everything else will sit around it, everything else will happen, and the lives we live will be quite beautiful. So that summarizes the kind of formal content for today. I hope that's been helpful and beneficial. We've got a few minutes left over, so I invite you all to, if you've got any questions or if you've got any comments that you want to share with the group, please put them in the chat box. We'll have a few minutes to respond to questions or to share your comments and ideas with the whole group before we wrap up in a few minutes. So we'll give you a moment or so to share any thoughts you might have or any questions you might have. Yeah, nice thoughts from Sister Irina. Time management is life management. Beautiful. Swami's also got lots of literature on this, so if you are interested in learning more, definitely have a look online. My Dear Students has a lot of thoughts he shared. He's talked to his students about how to study effectively, how to use different time periods during your day. There's endless amounts that he's got as well, so that's definitely something you could look into. If there's no questions, we might wrap up. I've got one from Radesh. My question is, at times it becomes very difficult to decide between SCI activities and personal goals like studying and work. Yeah, I think this is a great question, Radesh, and something that I think all of us have probably faced at different points in our life. I don't think there's a single answer, but two thoughts here. One, I often think of my studying and work as not being separate from SCI activities, and I often, if I've got a period, for example, when I'm studying for these exams, where I literally feel like I don't have time to, go to bhajans necessarily or go to all the service activities, I try and see my study or my work as a way to connect with Swami and as a SCI activity. And I think about how can I offer my study to Swami, how can I take moments during my study to meditate, to have moments of silence, to have moments of awareness. How can I, through my work, really see my colleagues, as divine and practice the values Swami has given me through my study and work. So I think that's one way. To not see them as separate, but to see them as the same thing. The other thought as well is I don't think it's binary in terms of deciding between SCI activities or work, and we can do both and strike a balance. That balance can be challenging, but certainly you can decide how much you do of each. So at some points in our lives, I can think of times when I had a lot of time for SCI activity. As an undergrad student, I didn't have much class time. I could be going to service activities 3 times a week, going to multiple centers, doing a lot of youth activity. And there are other times where I'm still doing it, but it's much less. But for me, SCI activity, particularly sadhana and spiritual activity, is central. And I found when I've been consistent with my own sadhana, my own meditation, my own practices, whatever that may be, everything else actually works out and gets done. So I hope that helps. I think in essence, it helps to not see them as different. It helps to prioritize SCI activities, but how much active time you put into it might vary depending on your life circumstances as well. If any others have thoughts, please share as well. We'd love to hear from all of you. A question from Sister Dulashka. How do we deal with stress due to time constraints? It's a great question as well. I think a couple of thoughts here. One, in terms of dealing, if I think about how we manage stress, a lot of it depends on how much is going on, but also what my capacity is to deal with how much is going on. So there's kind of two sides of it. So one thing we can do is build our capacity to manage more work and more stress. So one way that I found really helpful is just simply practicing meditation and mindfulness, taking out moments where I can breathe, where I can disconnect, where I can go for a walk, where I can really let go of the feeling that all of this is so important and really reconnect with the Swami inside me. So even just taking 30 seconds out when things feel stressful and just taking some deep breaths, I found can really lower the kind of stress I'm feeling, or to drink some water, or to go for a run. They say 30 minutes of active running actually drains all the stress hormone cortisol from your body. So one way is finding ways to build our resilience, so whether that's meditation or exercise. The other thing is thinking about what are the things that are causing the stress in my life? What are the activities or the people or the experiences or the environments that are stressful? And looking at, is there anything I can remove? If there's an environment that I find stressful, but to study in, can I study in another environment? If there's a lot of work going on that's stressful, can I say no to some of this work, and can I delegate some of it so there's less going on? So I think thinking about both sides, both, what can I do to build up my resilience and to manage the stress, but also are there drivers of the stress that I might be able to remove altogether? I think that's our time. Once again, thank you all for joining. It's been a real joy and a real pleasure to connect with all of you. A massive thank you to Nithya, who's here joining our conversation. to the wonderful YATD team for organising this, and finally to our Swami for being here with us and making this all possible. So I'll hand it over back to Kashir, and thank you once more for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Sister Shruthi, for sharing these practical tips on how we can utilize our time to its fullest. We recommend that if you haven't already done so, to please like the SAR Young Adult page on Facebook and Instagram to be notified of the next workshop. Thank you, everyone. Let's close to today's session with 1 Om and 3 Shanti. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Saram.